All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Xinyu Li, and I am the Professional Development Coordinator at CityCode. So thank you so much for joining us for the fifth session in our webinar series on the 2024 Connecticut World Language Standards. CityCode is very proud to partner with the Connecticut State Department of Education to offer these free series, which highlights the newly updated standards fully aligned with the ACTFL World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. So today's session will focus on the comparison standard. I'm also very honored to introduce our presenter for today. Elizabeth Bath is a dedicated educator with over 38 years of experience in teaching and advocating for language learning. With 15 years as a TESOL teacher in Spanish and 23 years teaching Spanish in Connecticut, Beth has developed a deep passion for language and their power to connect people. Currently, she serves as the Director of Multilingual Learners and World Languages in Hampton Public Schools. She works to support and enhance language education for diverse students populations. As a past president of CityCode, Beth has made significant contributions to the language teaching community, including co-chairing the CityCode Poetry Contest for more than 20 years. Beth remains a steadfast advocate for the importance of multilingualism in education and society. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you so much. I actually had a bio little speech put together, but you did a beautiful job, and thank you so much. And I am honored to be here amongst my colleagues, and thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Thank you. All right, so I do have a robust presentation today. So let's get started. So my goal is that today's session will help you become familiar with the newly approved Connecticut World Language Standards Goal Area 4 comparisons. You'll learn to integrate comparative analysis of languages and cultures into your instruction to foster deeper and linguistic awareness in your students. So my hope is that you will be able to understand the comparison standard, Goal 4, so that you can explain it to your colleagues and your students. You'll be able to explore how your learners compare language and culture through practical applications of cross-cultural and cross-linguistic comparison. And lastly, review performance descriptors and indicators that you can use for tasks and assessments. All right, so I think as Xingyu commented, both the ACTFL and the Connecticut World Language Standard Goal Area 4 emphasize the importance of comparisons as a way for learners to deepen their understanding of language and culture. They encourage students to reflect on the similarities and the differences between their own language and culture and those of the target culture, helping them think critically about how language structures and cultural perspectives influence communication and identity. A key outcome of these comparisons is the development of intercultural competence, the ability to interact effectively and appropriately with people from other cultures by understanding and respecting their norms, values, and viewpoints. All right, so here's just a screenshot, a visual overview of the Goal Area 4 from our newly approved Connecticut standards. We'll dive deeper into each section and explore specific examples and classroom applications in the slides that follow. Okay, actually this was part of my bio, but I'll share it now. In Hampton Public Schools, we have developed a universal curriculum, meaning that all of the languages that we offer, so we offer American Sign Language, Mandarin Chinese, Latin, Spanish, Spanish for heritage learners, we all follow the same curricula. And what we have done is we have developed for each unit and each year aligned to proficiency descriptors consists of 6 goals, which are aligned to our ACTFL World Readiness Standards. So you can see here, as an example, the first goal of every unit is intercultural. So just to read, this is our year 1 at our middle school, which is the same curriculum as our year 1 at our high school. The first goal of unit 1, for example, we're on unit 5 now, right? But I'll read unit 1. Investigate and identify social practices such as greetings, introductions, leave taking, and thanking people in my own language, in my own and other cultures. So there's an example of how we've embedded and aligned ourselves to the ACTFL World Readiness Standards, which again, align beautifully to our new Connecticut standards. All right. The overall goal of comparisons in world language learning emphasizes that learners build cultural competence by gaining insight into both language and culture. Learners develop insight into the nature of language and culture in order to interact with cultural competence. In language comparisons, learners use the language to investigate, explain, and reflect on the nature of language through comparisons of the language studied in their own. In cultural comparisons, learners use the language to investigate, explain, and reflect on the concept of culture through comparisons of the culture studied in their own. These definitions set the foundation for the performance indicators we'll explore in further moving forward in this presentation. All right. But first, we want to have a shared definition. So again, let's define 2 key terms: performance descriptors and performance indicators. Descriptors guide our instruction. Indicators provide concrete examples of what students might do to show growth. Keep in mind, descriptors are the what, and the indicators are the how. All right, so we're going to delve in first to the language comparisons, and I did my best to extract from our newly approved performance indicators to give some examples, and then again, I've asked my Hampden colleagues to share some of the examples that they have created, some of the tasks they have created both for language and culture comparisons, and you'll see them further on in the presentation. All right, so why compare languages? Comparing languages reveals how language works, and it fosters a deeper understanding of students' own language, their native language. It can also improve vocabulary and grammar awareness, as we all know as language learners. Learning another language doesn't just add knowledge, it changes the way we think, right? So language shapes our thought. One thing we gain from learning other languages is an acute awareness of our own language. We know teaching discrete grammar, you don't need grammar to speak, right? I know I've lived that. All those conjugations, all those years through high school and college, even in middle school. And really didn't pay off until I landed in Mexico and then in Spain and many other places and had to apply. But even studying a language for just a couple of years can teach you what a verb tense is. Learning grammar makes you better. Negotiating meaning, understanding grammar helps us become better readers, better problem solvers, and better communicators. Comparing languages also expands our vocabulary. You can learn so much vocabulary just from language study, words you might never have come across otherwise. And I share the word inculcate. Yes, I was a very young 21-year-old, and I remember learning the word inculcar in Spain while I was living there, and fast forward using it in English in my first language. So I learned that particular word in Spanish and transferred into English. By comparing languages and cultures, we don't just learn about others, we reflect on ourselves too. These comparisons are a gateway to becoming more culturally competent communicators. All right. Here's a look at the progression across proficiency levels. Novice learners begin by noticing patterns. And I think most of us work with novice learners, maybe novice high, intermediate low, intermediate mid. And if we do teach some of our more advanced, and I don't mean it's advanced by by the proficiency standards or descriptors, just more of our year 4, our year 5, right? Our intermediate learners reflect on and can make comparisons, and then our advanced learners can analyze and explain the deeper structure of language. All right, so let's delve into our novice. I'm just going to move us here because I see all of us and I just need to make sure I see the screen. Great. At the novice level, the students begin by investigating the nature of language through basic comparisons between their own language and the one they're studying. They focus on identifying cognates and false cognates, noticing differences in word order, and exploring formal versus informal expressions. These skills are supported through visuals, sentence starters, and guided questions to scaffold their understanding. The goal is to help novice learners recognize language patterns and build awareness that different languages organize and express ideas in unique ways. All right. So for novice students, carrying on, comparing cognates is very impactful, as we all know as practitioners. Students will be able to identify cognates between the target language and their own native language, noticing the patterns that connect them, and select and detect false cognates when the context, very important, suggests a familiar context. So here, this slide introduces a foundational concept for novice learners, identifying cognates. By comparing familiar English words, in this case, to their Spanish and Italian counterparts, students begin to recognize patterns and build confidence in vocabulary. It's a great entry point, cognates and false cognates, for language comparison, as it allows learners to notice similarities and make connections without needing full fluency. It also opens the door to discussions about false cognates and the importance of context, which I'm sure many of us have used false cognates and got ourselves in trouble. So here are a few, just I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see them. These are my favorite. So here's a look at the false cognates, right? Words that look similar across languages, but have very different meanings. These examples from Spanish and Italian demonstrate how relying too much on appearance can lead to misunderstandings. Highlighting false cognates is a great way to help novice learners develop critical thinking around vocabulary, and encourage them to pay attention to context when interpreting unfamiliar words. Of course, my favorite is the embarazada. I can't say I've ever walked into that, but that one is pretty powerful for those of us who teach Spanish. All right. So greetings are also a great starting point for our novice learners. Beginning students can see the difference between formal and informal greetings and practice being polite in both the new language and their own. So again, you can see here in English, hi, hey, hola, ciao, ni hao, etc. And then when we, our salutations when we leave someone. All right. So here are the expectations for intermediate learners in the area of language comparisons. At this level, students are expected to investigate and reflect on the structure of language by comparing their first language, their native language, with the language they're learning. This includes recognizing idioms that have no direct translation, comparing grammatical structures such as verb placement or time expressions, and beginning to hypothesize about patterns between languages. These skills help learners go beyond memorization, novice, and begin to notice how language reflects different ways of organizing thought, expression, and meaning across cultures. Love these, just have to say. These are some of my favorites. Let's look at the English idiom. Oh no, I spilt the beans. With the Spanish equivalent, irse de la lengua, which literally means one's tongue ran away. Both idioms mean to reveal a secret, but they use entirely different imagery rooted in cultural thinking. This task, which you can do with your student, this activity helps students recognize that idioms are more than wordplay. They reflect how people in different cultures conceptualize communication, emotion, and storytelling. Identifying and comparing idioms encourages learners to explore the deeper logic and creativity embedded in each language. All right, here's another example that compares the English idiom, the ball is in your court, te toca a ti, with the Spanish expressions, te toca a ti, o están tus manos, both of which mean it's your turn and your turn to act. While the literal images differ, sports versus hands, the intended meaning is the same. This task or this activity helps our students to understand that idioms reflect a culture's metaphors and values. In this case, English uses a sports metaphor, while Spanish uses one tied to personal responsibility or agency. Comparing idioms deepens learners' understanding of both language and cultural logic. Right. This we're all very familiar with. This activity shows students how Spanish expresses respect differently than English. While English uses you universally for everyone, Spanish, our Romance language, have two forms: usted for formal in Spanish and tú for the casual ones. Students practice real situations like meeting host families or ordering food to learn when to be formal or casual. This helps them understand that language reflects what cultures value, like respect and social relationships. All right. Here's another activity. Again, all of these I pulled from our new standards, those indicators as examples. This activity or task aligns with the intermediate level language comparison standard, where learners match groups of people with culturally appropriate ways of expressing respect. It highlights how titles and last names are used more consistently in Spanish than in English to show formality and social distance. For example, Spanish speakers say doctor, señora, don, doña, maybe less now than back 25 years, but I can remember those days. Even in casual social contexts, like addressing a friend's parent, where English speakers might just say a first name or Mr., Miss, Mrs. This comparison helps students see how language encodes politeness and social hierarchy, promoting reflection on how grammar choices reflect cultural norms. All right. I've done a lot of talking in the last 10 minutes, maybe not quite. But now I'd like to hear from you. And I know everyone on this screen, this is pretty straightforward, but I'd love to hear from you. Look at each person in the list and decide whether you would use the usted formal or informal tú when speaking to them in Spanish. Don't be shy. So your grandma would be?
Usted.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting, Michelle. Okay, yeah, maybe depending. Yeah, no, maybe depending.
Older generation, right? Which you
I would hope my granddaughter calls me too. But no, true story. When I lived in Spain, all those years, my mother-in-law, to so los abuelos lived with my mother-in-law, los bisabuelos, right, of my children. And mama, who I still call mama, my mother-in-law, she always directed herself to her grandparents as usted. Usted qué quiere comer? Usted, her mom and her dad. Very interesting. Thanks, Michelle. Your friend.
two.
Ooh, yeah. Your
Children.
teacher. This is an interesting one.
Usted.
I agree. And when I walk into Spanish classes, I say, is it that I'm old school? I don't want to believe that. I want to respect the usted for your teacher. So they're always very open to hearing me say, no soy tú, soy usted. How about a store cashier?
Usted.
Usted. Thank you, Lisa. Nice to see you. A waiter or a waitress?
Usted.
Usted. Thank you, Kevin. Your doctor?
Usted.
Usted. This is very validating. And a tourist asking for directions?
Depends on the form they use with you.
Absolutely,
Also
right?
depends on the age of the person, I think.
I agree. Yeah, good point. Very good point. All right. Okay, I'm just going to really scratch the surface with advanced because I don't think that most of us work with advanced learners, but I thought I would just address it. So advanced learners move beyond observation to engage in deeper cultural linguistic analysis. They investigate language structure by comparing their target language with their native tongue, examining how language reflects cultural values and worldview. This involves analyzing grammar patterns like Italian's compound past tenses versus English, our English progressive forms, or how Mandarin places time expressions early in sentences, revealing direct communication approaches. Learners also decode cultural meaning and idioms at this level. Time is money, as we say, carries economic values that don't translate directly across cultures, showing how expressions encode a society's logic. They explore communication systems too, comparing alphabetic scripts with character-based writing, or contrasting linear English argumentation with more circular relationship-based rhetorical styles found in other cultures. The goal is cultural literacy, understanding that language is never neutral. It mirrors how communities think, interact, and interpret their reality. All right. I want to hear from you again. So, what language features do you find fascinating? We can hear from one or two of you. So, if anyone would like to share an idiomatic expression or a pronunciation pattern or something they find, I'm going to say unusual or beautiful in the language that you teach or that you, or the languages that you teach or that you have acquired over time.
Well, I have a book called Lost
Go
in...
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt anybody.
Oh, no. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I have a book called Lost in Translation, which is a set of idioms that from various languages that have not been directly translated from one to another. And in French, there's one called feuille morte, which literally means dead leaf, and it's an expression that means having the color of a fading, dying leaf.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. Thank you. Anyone else like to share? I've always been enamored with the hypothesizing and the subjunctive. Again, probably shows my teaching years, but I love the ojalá. I always enjoyed teaching that and all the acronyms that we used. I found it fascinating and how it really does connect to the cultural identity. All right. We're good? All right. All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It is, a Chinese proverb. Language comparisons aren't just grammar drills. They open up how different cultures interpret the world around them. So I always think the window is such a beautiful vision to look through. All right. Well, now, I think it was 2017, 2018, but does anyone remember the sitcom The Big Bang Theory? You do? Okay. I don't know if you've seen these. I chose two and I thought, let me see how we're doing on time, but I really I really like these as examples, how Sheldon in the example of the Big Bang Theory, the sitcom, Sheldon shows his dear friend, he's trying to learn Mandarin to confront a Chinese restaurant about their menu labeling. But his poor pronunciation leads to complete miscommunication with staff. So it's a little humor, get us laughing a little bit here at the end of a school year where we're all so busy. The episode demonstrates how language barriers and cultural assumptions can create misunderstandings, showing why proper cross-cultural communication requires more than just intellectual knowledge. All right, let's see if I can play this first one. I'm going to make this screen. Can everyone hear it?
Sheldon. What the means it, Sheldon? What's this? That's what you did. I assumed as in a number of languages that the gesture was part of the phrase.
Well, it's not.
Why am I supposed to know that? As the teacher, it's your obligation to separate your personal idiosyncrasies from the subject matter.
You know, I'm really glad you decided to learn Mandarin.
Why?
Once you're fluent, you'll have a billion more people to annoy instead of me.
Hey, Medu Luiza.
You just called Leonard a syphilitic donkey.
My apologies, Leonard. I'm only as good as my teacher. Show me your citrus peels. Show me your citrus peels. Show me.
Sheldon?
Hiya! Just the water!
I'm sorry. Look, do you have a second?
A second, what? Pair of underwear?
2 seats right there.
John Shaw Shahway. Shay. Otsus Wes Alido. BT Zainar. BT.
你干见 BT 后，快走快走！
这不是六顶招的招。
Crazy man, call the police!
Bobby I get to Shuguan, BT Zainar.
慢药就我床上，多慢药。哎呀！
Okay, so I think that probably exaggerates my point. I'm not going to show the Lucy Gets Arrested in Paris. That's one of my favorites. And I have to say, generationally, I love Lucy. Still do love watching the remakes, but it's just so interesting because our two friends here, Sheldon knows a lot about quantum physics, but when it comes to social interaction, oh boy. So again, I hope you found that entertaining. Okay, let me just.
Sheldon.
Okay, there we go. All right. So when we compare, we're gonna move on to the cultural comparison. So when we compare cultures, we look at our 3 Ps, our products, our practices, and our perspectives. These 3 Ps help students recognize the why behind cultural behaviors. As world language educators, we can transform cultural learning by using the 3 Ps framework. Products, which can be tangible items such as food, toys, or tools. Practices, the behaviors like celebrations, schooling, and the perspectives, the underlying values and beliefs of those speakers of that language. These elements are interconnected. When students explore quinoa as a product, they can discover Andean farming practices and perspectives about community cooperation. This approach moves beyond memorizing cultural facts to developing genuine cultural competence, that interculturality I spoke to, that in Hamden, we make sure it's one of our 6 goals for each unit. And this helps students understand that language is the vehicle while culture is the destination. Here's a little bridge that I really like this visual. By comparing languages and cultures, we don't just learn about others, we reflect on ourselves too, as I've said throughout this presentation. These comparisons are a gateway to becoming more culturally competent communicators. Language is a bridge. Through cultural comparisons, students learn how values shape behavior and how different societies solve similar problems. They build empathy, insight, and most importantly, connection. Okay, so again, I really tried to pull examples from our new standards, our new Connecticut standards, those indicator-specific examples. So when teachers watch this presentation, they can glean some specific examples. So reading a newspaper doesn't just build language skills, it builds cultural understanding. You see what's happening in the world through another cultural lens. You notice what's different, what's the same. At the end of the day, we're all people and share similar needs. We want to feel safe and accepted, but those ideas might look different across cultures. Even looking at newspapers from different countries can show us cultural priorities. What's front page in Chile, China, or Italy may differ. What does that tell us? So you can see here 3 different newspapers using your knowledge of your skill cognates, maybe not with the Chinese, but you can decipher how different they are. All right. As with language, cultural comparison grows in depth, like I showed those progressions earlier on for the language comparisons. Novice learners notice surface level differences. Intermediate students begin to explain. Advanced learners reflect critically and hopefully with nuance. All right. So novice learners begin to explore language through basic cultural comparisons. The word investigate is intentional. We're not expecting analysis or deep reflection yet, as we know with our novice learners, just simply noticing and trying to spark some curiosity. This might look like identifying, again, to my previous example, familiar versus unfamiliar ways of greeting, saying goodbye, or using formal, informal language structures. The descriptor emphasizes culture. Novice learners start recognizing that how people speak reflects how they live. All right, and here again is, they might compare how they greet a teacher in English, as we said before, with the language versus Italian or Chinese, noticing different forms of respect. This sets the foundation for deeper analysis at the intermediate and advanced levels, where learners begin to reflect and explain these differences more fully. We can support this by creating activities, tasks, where students observe, label, and discuss basic cultural and linguistic features, even with gestures, visuals, and simple dialogues. All right. Venn diagrams. The best, right? We all use Venn diagrams. So it's a great graphic organizer scaffold, if I may, to a certain degree. They're perfect for helping students compare cultural celebrations because they're visual, they're simple, especially for language learners who can draw or write short phrases instead of long sentences. For example, when comparing US and Mexican birthday traditions, students place unique elements like birthday cake, balloons on the US side, piñatas and las mañanitas on the Mexican side, and shared traditions like family gatherings, food in the overlapping middle section. This approach works well because it uses concrete visuals to make abstract cultural concepts engaging while showing both differences and similarities that highlight universal human experiences. Teachers can easily add vocabulary to support this, and the format can be reused for comparing any cultural practices like weddings, holidays, school events, making it a versatile tool that deepens understanding when followed up with questions about why these traditions matter in each culture. Right. This is from one of my Handom teachers. When I asked, they so graciously shared so many examples. I tried to pick a few that I thought would be beneficial for this presentation. So here's another example of the versatility of a Venn diagram. This scaffold tool helps novice high to intermediate low Spanish students compare Hispanic culture with their own using the 3Ps framework: our products, our practices, and our perspectives. So students select a specific Hispanic culture and use familiar Spanish question words, qué, quién, cuándo, dónde, cómo, por qué, to analyze cultural elements in the left circle and then their own culture in the right circle, and in the center, their shared values. This format pushes students beyond isolated vocabulary towards structured sentences and deeper cultural reasoning by asking why people do certain things and what values drive cultural practices. It works perfectly as a pre-writing tool for paragraphs or presentations, speaking practice, or formative assessments after exploring units on foods, holidays, or daily lives. All right. Another task shared with me, and you notice I'm saying task, not activity. So always thinking about the rigor of a task and where we want to move students along the continuum of critical thinking. So another one shared with me was by one of my Italian teachers, where students compare transportation in Rome to their own community using visual supports and simple questions in Italian. The activity includes pictures of buses, taxis, subway systems to help students learn vocabulary while connecting words to real images. Students answer basic questions about what transportation exists in their own area versus, in this case, Italy, which naturally leads to discussions about why different places use different transportation methods. This particular task also includes a link to an authentic Italian website, giving students practice with real-world resources. This approach teaches both language and culture simultaneously. Students aren't just memorizing words, but understanding how transportation reflects daily life in different places. The format works for any city, any language, and students can share their own transportation experiences with their classmates. So we can build that standard of interpersonal writing, interpersonal speaking. Right. Another example shared with me from our Mandarin Chinese teachers in Hamden. So this task compares school schedules in China, Italy, and the United States, making cultural learning relatable since all students understand school routines. Very relevant to them. On the left, students examine a real Chinese schedule with characters in pinyin identifying similarities and differences with their own experience. Noticing cultural elements like early start times, morning exercise, or extended lunch breaks. On the right, students read an Italian schedule, answer comprehension questions in Italian, then compare routines in English, integrating language practice with cultural awareness. Through these comparisons, students explore all three cultural dimensions: products like school subjects, practices like daily routines, and perspectives about how different cultures value education and structure learning time. This is one of my favorites. Here's a sample from my American Sign Language teacher. So this task engages students in comparing hearing and deaf cultures by examining how traditions and events influence art, specifically through the work of deaf artist Chuck Beard. And if you haven't checked out his work, amazing, just Google him. It aligns with the novice level standard to compare cultural practices and products with an emphasis on artistic expression, language, and identity. So here are the products: Chuck Beard's paintings and ASL poetry, practices how deaf and hearing artists create and present their work, and the perspective, the values behind visual language, deaf pride, and the celebration of deaf culture. By filling out this comparison chart, students develop a basic framework to analyze what's unique to each culture and where do we find common ground through art. Really like that one. All right. So moving along to cultural comparisons with our intermediate students. Intermediate students go beyond noticing culture. They start exploring it. They investigate and explain cultural differences using the target language, asking why people live, act, and communicate differently. Topics like school, family, music, and social media help them relate and compare cultures while reflecting on their own. Again, the tools like the Venn diagrams and opinion statements support their thinking. They begin to connect what people do with why they do it, the beliefs and values behind the practices. At this stage, language and culture begin to come together as students can compare, explain, and respond to real-world questions. For example, how do teens use social media in two cultures, and what does that say about their values? All right. I'm not going to play the video. I know you would love me to, but you can do that on your own. All right. So this is an intermediate, or are we in a novice high here? We're in an intermediate low, I believe. So this is another shared task. So this intermediate level cultural comparison activity begins with students watching authentic video content of Colombian teens discussing their favorite school subjects, which provides natural listening practice while establishing cultural context. Students use what I call here, we could call it a worksheet, but I'm calling it a graphic organizer, with sentence starters to record what they hear, building vocabulary and sentence structure skills simultaneously. The task then guides them to compare Colombian school experiences with their own, create a relatable foundation for cultural discussion. Students conclude by explaining their personal favorite subject and comparing it to what they observed in the video, developing both self-expression abilities and cultural awareness. The activity can culminate in written paragraphs, class discussions, or partner interviews. The extension question, what does this tell us about what each culture values in education, elevates the learning by pushing students beyond their surface level observations as novice learners toward deeper cultural understanding and more meaningful cross-cultural comparisons. Didn't want to play that. We're going to carry on. All right. Again, just want to give you a quick example or speak to the advanced because that is part of our ACTFL World Readiness Standards, and we know Superior, which not going into for purposes of this presentation, but for purposes of presenting the newly approved world language standards, I will. So at the advanced level, students move beyond basic cultural observation to actively investigate, explain, and reflect on complex cultural concepts. They explore topics like health practices, educational systems, or gender roles across cultures, focusing not just on what is different, but the why those differences exist and what they reveal about each culture's values and priorities. Students support their analysis with research-based evidence from textual sources, case studies, interviews, engaging in sophisticated comparisons that examine daily practices alongside public policies and media coverage. This deeper approach leads to longer writing assignments, presentations, debates, where students draw from multiple cultures to make informed arguments, preparing them for the Connecticut Seal of Biliteracy certification, and AP level proficiency. I know in Hamden next year, we're going to have an ECE UConn cultural topics course. So for those more advanced courses where they must analyze, reason, and respond in culturally authentic ways. All right, we're almost there. We're almost there. All right, so this was an example from one of my year 5 Spanish teachers. And in this task, students analyze how cell phone addiction, a global health issue, is viewed and addressed in Mexican society, and then compare it to their own culture. They read an article and use evidence to support their responses in Spanish, building both critical thinking and language skills. The first question explores societal values, while the second looks at the role of families and educators, helping students connect cultural practices and perspectives. Students are encouraged to form ideas about why certain behaviors exist and test those ideas using real-world information. Because wellness and screen time, as we all know too well, are relevant to teens, this topic engages them while deepening their understanding of cultural responses to modern challenges. This activity can grow, again, like the previous ones I've presented, into a class discussion, a presentation, a personal reflection, all in Spanish, promoting advanced proficiency and cultural insight. Another one of my favorite quotes: culture is not how we see it, it's how others live it. So cultural comparisons help us appreciate practices we might not understand at first glance. It deepens our empathy and global awareness. So language and culture, to sum up, go hand in hand. They influence each other all the time. The words and phrases we use often show what a culture believes or values. Again, going back to my spilled beans, it doesn't make literal sense, but it reflects ideas about perhaps secrecy and honesty in a culture. An idiom in one language may not even exist in another because the cultural idea behind it might not be the same. And I just, again, going back to my years in Spain, I can remember my father-in-law saying, "Me estás tomando el pelo, Elizabeth." And I said, I'm taking your hair. I'm pulling your leg. I'm joking with you, right? So we all have those experiences, language educators, that just resonate so warmly with us. So even how we build sentences show cultural values. For example, in Mandarin Chinese, time words often come first. Yesterday, I went to the library. This shows a focus on setting context early, which reflects cultural habits in communication. As already shared during this presentation, language reveals cultural values, not just grammar rules. Spanish and Italian use the informal, the formal you to show respect and social relationships. English speakers say time is money, reflecting our focus on efficiency, while other cultures view time as something to share or enjoy. Understanding these connections helps our students become better communicators who grasp what cultures value, not just teaching vocabulary and grammar, which is so beautiful that we've moved way beyond that. All right. And this brings me to the end of our presentation and right on time. So I'm glad I didn't play that I Love Lucy video, but please watch it when you can. So just wanted to hear from you. What are you already doing that supports language and cultural comparisons? I'm sure you're doing wonderful things in your districts. What new strategies are you thinking about adding? I'd love to hear your ideas before we wrap up. And I thank you for being such a patient audience as I've interpreted the new Connecticut standard of comparisons for all of you. Anyone
Hi.
want to-
Hi, it's Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi. Sorry, I'm home from work and now I'm walking my dog and listening simultaneously.
Oh, good.
You know, we all multitask.
I do.
So I really enjoyed hearing the specific examples that you gave. And I
Mhm.
like, it's gotten me thinking from a director perspective, what are we looking at when we're having conversations about classroom practices? Because, you know, if we were to drill down deeply into what are we asking our students to do, it really helps us to think about if we're meeting the standards. So it was great to see the examples. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing. And this is a work in progress, you know, in my role as director of our multilingual learner program in Hamden and our world languages program. It is just a work in progress, and I am fortunate that I work with a great team of individuals. We're constantly, you know, trying to say, how can we do better for our students? How can we really make sure that our instruction is aligned to the standards, that we're monitoring our students' progress? So it's a beautiful thing. It truly is. Anyone else before we have 3 minutes? No? Well, thank you. So thank you for being part of today's discussion. It's nice to see my friends. Your work is what brings these standards to life, without a doubt. So thank you for all you do. I hope you leave with new tools and a renewed sense of purpose in helping students develop insight into both language and culture. That is my passion, my personal life and my professional life. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Beth.
Thank
you so much.
you.
Great presentation. And yes, and thank you for everyone to joining us today. I just want to give everyone a reminder that we do have one more session to go on June 4th with Jessica Haxey, focusing on the connection standards. And we hope to see you back. So please remember to register. And also don't forget to sign up for our in-person Summer Institute on June 25th from 9 to 3 p.m. at South Windsor High School. So we will deepen our understanding and application for the 5 C's and create space for everyone to share meaningful discussions and sharing best practices and collaborate with our language educators. So once again, thank you so much, Beth, for
Thank you for hosting us. Thank you. Thank you.
absolutely. And I hope to see everyone again soon. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Take
Bye.
care. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.